Merry Christmas. It's the full hour of the Newsmaker show from the archives of Kevin Doran here on December 25th, 2019. In segment 1, it's Dr. Christian Kopff from May of 2014 when Kevin Doran spoke with Dr. Kopff about his thoughts on the European Union and a new gospel that had been suddenly discovered mysteriously in 2014. And coming up in the second half hour, we're going to hear a show from 1987 with Malachi Martin about Pope John Paul II's visit to the United States, the second papal visit by JP2. I have to say, this is a show from May of 2014, just a year and some months before Kevin's death. It's amazing. The announcers all marveled for years about this in the studios, how well Kevin's voice held up right until the end. He never thought he had a great voice, but no doubt that he did. Okay, let's get going from May of 2014. Here's Kevin with Dr. Christian Kopff.
On the Newsmaker Show, Professor Christian Kopff, University of Colorado in Boulder. Stand by, America.
Next on News Talk, AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show with Kevin Doran.
Unfortunately, we still have political party affiliations. I'm getting more and more disgusted with that whole concept. I'm a Republican and I'll stick by George Bush, whatever he does, even if he gets us into a dumb war. Or I'm a Democrat and if Obama broke the law, he's still my... Come on, we've got to get past that. We've got to get our country back. And you can't do it by blind allegiance to any political party. That's my speech. You do what you want.
Yes, the interesting thing is that these guys went nuts when President Nixon told the English interviewer, if the president does it, then it's legal. David Frost, President Nixon, if the president does it, it's legal. Everyone went berserk over that. Well, this is basically what Barack Obama's been saying from day one.
Yeah.
He makes up the laws. He amends laws, which he has no right to do. He refuses to enforce laws. And if the president does it, it's okay. And, this is not a consensual institution. This is a dictatorship. This is a tyranny when there are no checks and balances. And that's what we're seeing with the presidency as it's run under Barack Obama. He does what he wants to do.
And then you got a very weak Congress. I think it's weak.
Well, you've got one, it is split. And secondly, Boehner is really, is no longer a leader.
Don't you think Boehner will be done at the end of this year?
I think he may expect to be done.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then he would make fun of people who oppose him by saying that they're crying when he's the crier. Has he never seen Saturday Night Live? Yeah. Has he never seen Dennis Miller call him Fannie Mae Boehner? I mean, this is the biggest crier in the history of our country. And he's making fun of people standing up for the rule of law, saying that we need to enforce the law and obey the law by saying that they're crybabies.
Yeah.
I mean, no one can see anything but that he plans to, take a job with the Chamber of Commerce or take a job with Facebook or something.
Well, let me tell you, I did this on the air some time ago, and I can't find it now, but the retirement pay for a former speaker or majority leader in the Senate is phenomenal. I mean,
yeah, that's right.
That's their retirement pay. So he can retire and live like a millionaire for the rest of his life. Yep. Now, should we be critical of that? Let me say this, folks. If you and I'm talking to our listeners now, Chris, if we could determine our own salaries and our own bennies, would anyone be surprised if we were generous with ourselves, huh?
No, because we know how valuable we are. Yes. I mean, what kind of a system lets people pay themselves after they retire, and then they can go and cry poorhouse all the time they're in Congress because they know they're getting these fantastic benefits afterwards. Mm-hmm. And how it differs from embezzlement, I don't really see. It is, of course, legal. I mean, the one difference is it's legal. They're allowed to do this, but it is not right. And this is something that as the country gets more corrupt, we see this over and over again. We see this also with the out-of-control judiciary, which simply makes up laws all the time, and there's no checks and balances to stop them. We see it with the IRS that harasses the president's political opponents and there's no way to stop them. I mean, it's really and it's all legal in the sense that they've set up the rule. In fact, the IRS is now rewriting the rules, so anything they did wrong before now becomes legal.
We'll take a break with Chris Kopff. We get back, we'll talk about the gospel from Jesus' wife. And I've got a bridge I want to talk to you about. Stay tuned.
Doing a full hour of the Newsmaker show today here on AM 1480 WLEA. And we're going to continue the Chris Kopff show in just a moment. And then coming up right after the 8:30 news, Kevin's 1987 interview with Malachi Martin. Stay with us.
I'm Maria Bartiromo, and this is the Fox Business Report.
Spending and traveling over the holiday season, you rack up a lot of points. Scott Merowitz, executive editorial director at The Points Guy, says use them.
Every once in a while, these programs do devalue. We always say earn and burn as quickly as you can.
He says do a little research, too.
Gift cards are not usually the best. You're getting a cent per point or even less. And if you transfer them to the right airline or you're flying business class, you can get 2, 3, even 4 cents per point as a value.
Merowitz says airlines are relaxing some rules on points now.
JetBlue, for instance, now lets you pool your points between family members. Hilton's doing the same.
But beware, rewards programs do change. The markets are closed for the Christmas holiday. That's your Fox Business Report. I'm Ginny Cosola, invested in you.
A few years ago, my wife and I couldn't find great bedding in any stores, so we founded our own company. I'm Scott Tannen, the founder of Boll & Branch, the world's most comfortable sheets. Right now, check out our luxury flannel collection. It sells out every year. That's because Boll & Branch flannel is cozy but breathable. Cool sleepers and hot sleepers all love it. And right now, get $50 off any sheets at bollandbranch.com with promo code BEDROOM. That's spelled BOLL and branch.com. Promo code BEDROOM.
From the Fox Sports Studios in Los Angeles, here's Steve DeSager.
Hawaii won college football's Hawaii Bowl 38-34 over BYU on a touchdown pass with just over a minute to go. Cole McDonald with 4 TD passes and 493 yards through the air. BYU in defeat committed 3 turnovers, including a key fumble at the goal line late third quarter. Titans running back Derrick Henry returned to practice. He had missed last week's game with a bad hamstring. Eagles tight end Zach Ertz with his fractured rib is questionable for Sunday's finale at the Giants. The Mets gave reliever Dylan Betances a 1-year, $10.5 million deal. The Diamondbacks agreed to a 2-year contract with outfielder Cole Calhoun, who leaves the Angels. No NBA or college basketball games Christmas Eve, but 5 NBA games coming up on Christmas, including at night Lakers versus Clippers, and reportedly LeBron James and Anthony Davis returned from injuries to play. The Denver Nuggets gave head coach Mike Malone an extension through 2023.
Back with Dr. Christian Kopff, University of Colorado. Always so much fun talking about it. Did you get my email about that? I said how much I look forward to our chats every Thursday. Yeah.
Yes, I did.
Listen, I don't know anything about this gospel of Jesus' wife, but I think you do. Am I right? What's that all about?
Well, it's now been published. For a long time, it was just a report, an oral report made to a international conference. And then it got covered by the New York Times to plug it, conference. And then it got careful examination of it. And now it's finally been published in the Harvard Theological Review. And it's kind of interesting. It is a papyrus about the size of your hand that has, it's written in Coptic, which is the language of ancient Christian Egypt. And it claims to be a discussion of Jesus about the role of women. And it's fragmentary. It's full of holes. I don't think there's a complete sentence. There might be one complete sentence. But the end of one line says, Jesus says, my wife or my woman. And that's the end. The line is ripped away. Well, this has now been published. And the author, who teaches at Harvard Theological Seminary, Karen King, claims this is a very important document. It shows the importance of women in the early church, and on and on. If it's legitimate. The problem is from the beginning it's been questioned. She claimed it was a 4th century document that was a Egyptian translation of the 2nd century Greek document and showed that it was important in the early church. The papyrus has now been tested on carbon-14 dating, and it's the 8th century. The handwriting was identified by an expert who's a classicist, Roger Bagnell at Columbia, as being 4th century, and he is not able to explain how 4th century handwriting got on an 8th century papyrus, unless, of course, it's a fraud. Furthermore, every other line in the entire thing comes from a work known as the Coptic Gospel of Thomas, which is a bunch of Jesus sayings that survive in Coptic translation. And every single one of them, and not only do these things come from the Gospel of Thomas, but the breaks in the lines are where the breaks are in the original publication of this work. Does it look like somebody copied out random lines from the Gospel of Thomas, except, of course, for this one end of the line, Jesus said, "my wife." And there's the majority of scholars who are experts in Coptic, which is a very small group, by the way.
I would think, yeah.
There really are that many of them, but there are a bunch. I think it's a forgery that was done to make a lot of money. And there's a small group of people who think that we don't really know. And then there's Karen King at Harvard and the Harvard University Press that is all plugging this as this important discovery, you say, that, and of course, Dan Brown and, of course, that important Harvard professor, Professor Langdon, the professor of symbology and the Da Vinci Code. Keep having to warn my students not to apply to the symbology department at Harvard. It's as imaginary as the rest of the book.
Isn't it a fact that almost from the very beginning, people have tried to debunk Jesus, but there's something they can never get around, and that is, would these apostles and disciples have gone out and laid down their lives for a fraud? And the answer is, of course not. They would not have done that. No.
Not to mention the fact that their own description of themselves is that they were completely demoralized, that they were hiding, that they denied Jesus.
That they were dumb, yeah.
Yes, that we had no idea what it meant, even though they say, he told us over and over again that the Messiah was not going to be a conquering king. It was going to be the suffering servant of the Lord in Isaiah. It was going to involve suffering and being beaten and dying. He told them, but it just didn't penetrate because everyone was expecting a Messiah who was going to lead an army, drive out the Romans, and establish, the new Davidic monarchy. And then they say, and we changed our mind when he came back and told us.
I remember.
Why would we? And can you say these people are all being persecuted and stoned and crucified in some cases? Why would they do this for something they made up?
Well, now we've got somebody at Harvard. See, if they can debunk Jesus and he doesn't exist,
right,
or he was a fraud, then anything goes, like our friend Sterling out in Los Angeles. Maybe just as well we don't talk about him.
We won't get into that.
No. Well, I've got another guest in Boulder that I've had on the show quite a bit lately. I'm going to have her again next week. This is the gal who's the expert on body language. I think I mentioned that to you once, Chris.
Yeah, you did mention it. Yeah, that's right.
And the next time I have her on, I'm just going to start throwing out names.
Okay.
And ask her, what did the body language of so-and-so tell you? By the way, this may interest you. In 2001, when George Bush took office, she was still in college, right where you are.
Okay.
And she had not become an expert on body language yet. Now she's written a couple books, and she lectures all over the country. But she said a friend of hers who already had taken all the courses said to her, and had been out lecturing on it, said when George Bush took office, he showed all over in his body language, we're going to war. And of course, and of course we know now, we didn't know then, that he came into office with the idea of attacking Iraq. And that was a big number for the neocons, and Bush was very much under their influence. I think he regretted it later on, don't you?
Yes, he later admitted it, but at the time he was selling himself as the reasonable choice.
Yeah.
And it was going to be Gore who was going to get us involved in things, because Clinton had not led us into a war, but he'd intervened in a number of areas around the world. It was thought that Gore was going to continue that.
But as anyone...
It turned out to be the opposite. It was Bush who wanted to get us into wars.
Yeah. The minute they say, I'm going to keep you out of war, brace yourself.
Well, no, that's Mr. Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt, who was always rampaging, never got us into a war.
Isn't that funny? He always wanted to go to war, but, the Spanish-American War, he had a lot to do with that.
He actually charged up a hill with people shooting at him. I think that somewhat modifies your view about war.
And what was it Churchill said? There's something about a bullet whizzing by your brain that can concentrate your mind very... Something like
absolutely.
that.
No, Churchill...
He also, at the beginning of World War I, he wanted to get right into it. He was... Of course, they did get into it, but he was all for it. And a cabinet member wrote in his diary, Winston has his war paint on.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the indication was that as the war was... Everyone in the British cabinet was very depressed because the war was beginning and the lights are going out all over Europe, said Sir Edward Grey. And Churchill was jumping up and down. He could hardly control how excited he was that there was going to be a war.
Well, listen, let's talk a little bit, as long as you're in Europe here with our thoughts. First of all, we should explain, or you should explain rather, what is the European Union? It seems to be going on the rocks, and I add to that the Latin phrase Deo gratias, and let's hope we never make the same mistake of trying to put all these countries together. In fact, George Bush was doing that. Canada, the United States, and Mexico, one big country. No thanks, not interested in that. But in Europe they did, and now they're somewhat disenchanted, aren't they?
Yes, they are. There are two issues. One was the negative one of if we're all part of one economic pact, we won't go to war, so there was that negative. And there was also the positive one, that if they created a market as large as the United States, then they would equal the United States, because they attribute a lot of our prosperity to our consumerism and the fact we buy so much stuff. Well, it's beginning to sink in that there's a difference between the United States and the different European countries, and people who are questioning the European Union and its effect are doing quite well. There were elections for the European Cabinet, the European Parliament, and they don't have very much power, but it does represent... You're allowed to make a protest vote that doesn't affect your own country. And we're seeing parties... The National Front in France has been an anti-European Union, an anti-immigration party now for about a generation, and they slowly grew into the teens as far as getting percentage of the vote. Well, this time, they were the number one party in France. They got 26% of the vote. The socialists who run the country sank all the way down to the teens. They're in danger of sinking out of sight. It was a devastating repudiation of the socialists, and it was a great victory for the head of the National Front, Marine Le Pen, who's this very brilliant, get on YouTube and see her statements. They're really well done. Meanwhile, but see, the National Front has been around now for about 30 years, on and off, maybe a little bit longer. In England, the similar party, the United Kingdom Independence Party, or UKIP, has only been around a number of years. And they also got about a third of the vote for the European Union. They again have a very articulate leader named Farage, who just really, very witty, very clear about the fact that England should trade, but they shouldn't be part of a massive, large governmental body which can overrule the will of the British people. And so it's really quite... people knew that there was going to be a protest vote. Nobody quite saw that these two parties were going to get to the top of the voting in, two major countries, France and England.
Well, one of the complaints that the Europeans... I'm glad they're finally waking up. One of their complaints is that they're being governed by not their own governments, but by bureaucrats in Brussels. That's where the European Union is headquartered.
And not even the European Parliament, but by the bureaucrats in Brussels. And these bureaucrats make rules about manufacturing, about growing things. They intervene in the economic and political life. They make immigration very easy. Once you're inside, if you're a member of the European Union, you go everywhere without even showing a passport. We Americans still have to show our passports. And the result is that people are flooding out of the less successful countries and the more successful ones, and even worse, people from Africa and the Near East flooding into southern Europe. Then once they're in Europe, they can go all the way to France and England.
Right.
So they're having a terrible problem there. It's one of the reasons why workers increasingly vote for the National Front in France, because they're the only party that wants to protect the jobs of the workers from immigrants. And the Communist Party has imploded in France, and the Socialist Party is now on the verge of doing the same because they don't support their own people.
Mm-hmm. The Parliament, by the way, the European Parliament is 751 people. Now, what? That's just, you know what that is? That's a chance to pay off these guys with a nice job in Brussels. That's what that is. I mean,
yes, it is.
They have no real power. Yeah.
The funny thing is, Farage, the head of the UKIP party, the United Kingdom Independence Party, he's been the only guy from his party there for years now, since 1999. And he sort of stands up every once in a while. Everyone makes fun of him because he's a Eurosceptic, but he makes a very nice living from being a member of the European Parliament. Yeah. Well, now he's going to have friends.
Yeah.
They can actually stand up and do something and vote something and have an effect on what's going on. It is kind of a joke, and because it's so large and so ineffective, that's how the bureaucrats, of course, took over.
Now, how does that apply to us in the good old U.S. of A.?
Well, in one sense, we are a nation with states that are the size of many European countries and even bigger than most European countries, frankly. But the problem is our legislature going to resume effectiveness? Because one reason why the bureaucracy is taking over is precisely because our legislative body has been stymied, and so the bureaucrats use this as an excuse, as they have in the European Union, to start making rules and start making decisions that affect our lives.
Well, we've seen that for a long time in this country, where the bureaucrats are running it.
World War II.
What's that?
It's been growing since World War II, step by step by step. Yes.
And
now it's virtually the norm. It's virtually the norm. Is that the IRS decides things. The FBI decides who they're going to investigate.
On that, we have to end this week. Next week, we'll talk about the disappearance. I don't want to scare you here, Prof, the disappearance of classics at some of our big universities, since that's what you teach.
Already.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that next week. Dr. E. Christian Kopff, University of Colorado in Boulder, our guest every Thursday. Thanks, Chris.
Great to talk to you.
They had a great rapport. Always good hearing Dr. Christian Kopff's voice again. That show from May of 2014. Kevin had a great ability to talk philosophy, history, religion, you name it. Going to take a break for news and weather. Stay with us on this December 25th, Christmas Day 2019.